Hey there, Jerry Audet, Managing Editor, Surfcasters Journal, your only source for surfcasting down here at Saltwater Edge today. Want to talk about treble hooks. You know, the hooks that come on a lot of lures these days, they're not really up to snuff. Some are okay, especially if you're only going to be chasing schoolies. But for the most part, if you're going to be stepping up even to slot fish, 20 pounds and up for sure, you're going to want to replace the treble hooks. I've tested a whole bunch of treble hooks extensively. There's a few things you really want to look at in the surf specifically, okay? The first is weight. The second is how well does it penetrate? So how well does the hook actually penetrate? Which has a little bit to do with the barb, which is another component of it. Obviously the strength, and then the rust, how much does it rust? So we've got, 5 upgrades here. Even on plugs that come with the pretty decent VMC 9626, sometimes need an upgrade. Those hooks are pretty good. That's what comes on like the Super Strike plugs, for example. A lot of plug makers use that VMC. But for me, if I'm fishing heavy current, if I'm looking for 40-pound fish, I want to upgrade. But I like to use those when I compare all the other hooks to something. So those are kind of the standard. So the VMC, again, let's go through the factors. The VMCs, they are pretty strong. They're okay rust resistance. They penetrate pretty well, but they're actually pretty light. And that can actually be a good thing because as you add a heavy hook to a lure, you can totally screw up its swimming action. So that brings me to the first hook that I want to talk about. What I usually call one of my bread and butter hooks is the Mustad 9430DS. This is a very burly, very rugged hook. It's called a 5X. It outstrips a lot of hooks that call themselves 6X. This is a 4.0. This is a big hook, okay? That's something else to keep in mind when you're upgrading your hooks is some of these hooks, the sizes are all over the place. And I'll get to that in a second after I get to the other factors we compare to the VMC. So comparing to the VMC, this is a much stronger hook. It's a much thicker wire, okay? It's heavier though. This is a much heavier hook. A 3.0 Mustad is right in the ballpark of a 4.0 VMC. And that goes for a lot of these upgraded hooks. They're quite a bit heavier. Again, doesn't matter on some plugs, it matters on others. For something like a Super Strike or a lot of the Gibbs plugs, for example, you can go right up to the heavier hook, the same size, no problems at all. If you're trying to use something like an SP Minnow or a Redfin, you sometimes want to size down. So, for example, if you're worried about the weight, again, going from a 4.0 to a 4.0, maybe you want to go down to a 3.0 in the Mustad. Again, very thick, very heavy. The negatives of this hook, though, besides with the positives being the strength and the durability of it, very large barb. Very large barb, very thick hook. Again, strength, right? It's strong, but you don't have the penetration power. You really got to sock these suckers home to get past that barb. One of the ways you can get around this, and I've done this, is you can completely crimp the barbs. But for some of you, that leads to too much anxiety about losing fish, so you can half crimp them. So if you just take them down about halfway, they still function well, but it helps the hook really sock home because you got to get it past that barb. Another hook that's super heavy that I really like, but you're really going to get a sense of the differences in size here, is the Owner Stinger or the ST66 hook. Okay, now again, this is a 4.0. Okay, this is not a 9626. This is a different VMC, which I'll talk about in a second, but it's identically sized. Okay, this is a 4.0 and this is a 4.0. All right. That is a phenomenal difference, right? They're nowhere in the same ballpark. This has got to be at least a 6.0 VMC. This hook is too big, frankly. And that can be frustrating when you're trying to figure it out online, which is why it's great to come into a shop. But the ST66 hooks are really big. They have a very wide gap here at the tine, okay? But the real benefit of the Owner, besides being stronger than that 9626, is that they are insanely scary sharp. They are very sharp. They have a small but very functional barb that leads to extreme levels of penetration. They are rad. They are very good hooks. I like to use these on things where I might have to have a little bit of slack to get them to work. A glide bait, maybe a darter, although you don't have that problem so much. Needlefish, especially if you're using a needlefish in maybe a little bit rougher water where you might lose contact for a second. The fish hits, you got to take up that slack. Having an extremely sharp hook that's going to be super sticky can be really critical. The number one downside of these is they don't stand up. As with many other owner products, they're sharp, they're strong, but their durability is lackluster. It would be better if they had some kind of other finish that made them hold up. Even if you don't get a lot of fish on them, just sort of the rubbing on a split ring or something, they start to rust really quickly. You won't have that trouble with the Mustad. And frankly, these are worse than the VMCs, the cheap VMCs. Which brings me to the other problem. These things are pretty damn expensive. The Stingers are not a cheap hook by any stretch of the imagination. Which brings us to other hooks with the same problem. If you want to go to some more expensive hooks, you really have to weigh the cost benefit, of course. I only use them on my really critical plugs during very critical tides when I'm looking for bigger fish, or on plugs that I have difficulty hanging on to fish. Fixed hook points, big baits, things that the fish can get a lot of leverage on. So expensive hooks, SD66. BKKs are also pretty damn pricey, but I think they're even more worth it than the Stinger, the owner hook, because they hold up really well. And frankly, the way that these Raptor Zs are built, they're even stronger, which has a lot to do with actually the design of the hook. So you can see they're very round, where the point actually starts to come back around to the main shaft. These are way overkill for striper fishing. I mean, even the biggest stripers in the canal, you know, in an inlet somewhere, I mean, you're never going to ever run into trouble, you know, with these breaking, straightening, or any of that. But again, it's pretty expensive, especially you're putting them on a plug. They could be half the price of the plug you're putting them on. So I highly recommend them for those critical moments, those critical tides, those critical plugs, but they're not going to be for everybody. This is really for you guys who are more into trophy hunting. Sort of a middle of the road hook that I do actually really like. I know some people don't care for these quite so much, but I think they're a good hook, is the VMC Fish Fighter treble. I believe these are the 8527 Heat PS, which stands for Permasteel. These look just like the VMC 9626 that comes on the Super Strike plugs and other plugs. I mean, they look identical. You have a hard time seeing them unless you really hold them close and kind of see that the finish is a little different. But they are much stronger. They hold up very well to saltwater. I think these are one of the better hooks that holds up to saltwater very well. The problem, well, hold on, before I get to the problems. So if you're looking to upgrade your Super Strike plugs and you don't want to mess with, I don't want to mess with different swimming action, and I don't want to have to test. I just want to replace something that's stronger. I don't want to know if it's going to work size-wise. This is a direct change-out, okay? Significant upgrade, direct change-out. You don't have to think about anything. They're great. The problem with these, besides them being much more expensive, is that I found that they can be a little brittle. These tend to not bend, they tend to break. And I broke multiple tip points. I'm not a canal fisherman, but actually the few times I've done that, that was one of the times I did it. I broke the tips right off the tines a couple of times on some very serious fish and current. So you just have to be aware of when you're using these that you don't push them to the absolute limit. I wouldn't want to be completely locking down with these, but then again, you probably shouldn't be locking down on anything anyways, unless it's, well, they're going to get around the corner and break my line anyways, and then, you know, what are you going to do? So again, all the hooks have, you know, upsides, downsides, strength, price, you know, how quickly they rust, if they're softer and they tend to deflect a little bit, which is maybe what these guys are, or they just fully on break, which is what these guys might do. You know, you got to know. Now, that being said, as I sort of alluded to at the beginning, upgrading your hook to a larger, heavier hook is not always a good idea. You can destroy the swimming action, okay? You can send your hook, your plug directly into the bottom. These are not always good things. One hook I suggest that is a very good upgrade for smaller, lighter plugs, so you avoid those things, avoid destroying their action, avoid driving in the bottom, is the BKK Viper. Now, this hook isn't necessarily that much stronger. I haven't put it through my home testing. I don't know how much stronger or if it is stronger than a VMC. I think it is, just anecdotally on the beach. But it's much sharper, much sharper, and you can get a little bit bigger hook that's a little bit lighter, so you have a little bit more purchase in the fish's mouth. And this works absolutely excellent for SP minnows, mag darters, a mambo minnow, anything that's smaller, something like a jumping minnow. This would work great for because they're light, but they're sharp and they're strong. You try to get a hook of this size with this large of tines, and it's going to be pretty heavy. This is a 2.0 right here, and you can see that compared to the VMC, well, I hope you can see, compared to the VMC 4.0, the tines are almost the same size. The gap is almost the same, yet this is a much lighter hook. So that's really a huge benefit. So again, I guess maybe one of the big things I'm trying to impress here is that treble hooks are so important. Terminal tackle is one of the most important things, yet we spend way more time thinking about what plug we're throwing, what's the action on a rod, or like what braided line we're using. And if you're really serious about landing that super trophy fish, you want to be thinking about what treble hook will work best for your plug.